Volgorechensk, a quaint town in the Kostroma region, first appeared on the map of the Soviet Union in 1964. Its birth was tied to the construction of one of the era's energy giants, the Kostroma Grass power plant. The town's initial population was built from young people arriving for the construction project under Komsomol directives. They fell in love, married, and started families. As their children grew, parents were reluctant to let them go despite the town offering limited prospects. Local boys faced a choice between becoming apprentices at the pipe factory or the power plant, while girls could choose between training as painters, plasterers, or seamstresses at the local vocational school. But at least it's peaceful here, parents would say, unlike the big cities. Every mid-August, Volgorechensk celebrates its city day with daytime festivities and an evening fireworks display. By 10:15 p.m., the last fireworks burst signals the end of the official celebration. But for the town's youth, the night is still young, and they seek to continue the fun. This was the case in 1991. Back then, staying within city bounds for post-celebration fun was challenging. The local park, built alongside residential quarters, featured a summer dance floor. However, the progressive youth preferred the neighboring village of Sidorovskoye, which had a live band instead of a tape recorder. The 9-kilometer walk to Sidorovskoye did not deter the youth, who danced to live music until midnight. With buses no longer running, they either walked back home or hitched a ride. It was a safe enough environment until August 1991. Two schoolgirls, Anya and Yulia Shustrova, best friends, did not return home after a night out. Their parents knew when to expect them back, and Anya's mother left the kitchen light on so she'd know she was awaited. But by morning, Anya's bed was cold. A frightened mushroom picker called the police that morning to report finding 2 female bodies. Detectives arriving at the scene recount a forest that could have been described as enchanting, if not for the blood trail leading from a small clearing to a thicket where a makeshift shelter hid the bodies. They hurriedly documented everything that might become evidence. The first entry in the crime log was emotional. 2 children's bodies found in the forest. The next noted the likely use of a hunting knife by someone of considerable strength, given the numerous, over 20, stab and slash wounds on each body, some penetrating entirely through them. The victims' positions told a story of sexual assault. Their shoes and some clothing items were missing, suggesting the killer might have taken them. Nearby, investigators found the first sign, a set of 3 parallel tracks left by narrow tires, likely from a motorcycle with a sidecar. Motorcycles with sidecars were common in rural Soviet areas, usually Dnieper or Ural brands, narrowing the search. Detectives were certain the perpetrator was a local. It seemed unlikely someone would travel far on such a vehicle. As the parents of Anya and Yulia searched for their daughters among the living, the horrifying news spread through the town. 2 bodies found in the nearby forest. The grieving parents were informed just as the police were piecing together the girls' final moments. A friend of the girls identified the bodies as Anya and Yulia. At the crime scene, detectives hypothesized that the motorcyclist, likely known to the girls, had offered them a ride. With Sidorovskoye nearby, they felt safe and accepted, but were diverted to the forest. Teams interviewed residents of both Sidorovskoye and Volgorechensk to reconstruct the girls' last day. Crucial testimony came from a boy who saw the girls on a speeding motorcycle, one in a red helmet, the other in white. It was already dark, and he couldn't describe the rider, but he identified the bike as a heavy Dnieper. Detectives prepared for an extensive investigation, determined to find justice for Anya and Yulia in a place where peace had been shattered. To solve the case of the murdered schoolgirls, it was essential to not only investigate local motorcycle owners, but also those living near the border of the Ivanovo region. The police sought anyone riding black, brown, dark blue, or green Dneprs or Urals. Detectives considered that the child who witnessed the vehicle in the dark might have been mistaken about the model. Investigators scrutinized the families of Anya Bobina and Yulia Shustrova, finding no dark secrets. These were ordinary working-class people who had built the town of Volgorechensk. All evidence suggested the girls had a random encounter with the killer. Any schoolgirl could have been in their place. Residents of Volgorechensk and nearby towns became wary of motorcycle owners with sidecars. In Volgorechensk alone, the number of suspects grew to several hundred. Weeks were spent eliminating innocent names from the list. Police visited every motorcycle owner in town, but none were detained after scrutiny. The focus then shifted to neighboring towns. Kostroma detectives discovered that 6 weeks before the murders of Anya and Yulia, 2 other bodies had been found in the woods across the border in the Ivanovo region. These young women were also missing underwear and shoes. However, the Ivanovo police had ruled both cases as suicides. The first victim, 27-year-old Lyubov Glotova, was last seen alive at a nearby resort. She had left early in the morning while her friends were asleep. Her body was found a few days later in the forest near Privolzhsk, posed similarly to the Volgorechensk schoolgirls. But her death was due to strangulation rather than stabbing. A noose was found around her neck, tied to a tree. Ignoring the motorcycle tracks near the scene, the Ivanovo police believed the marks were left by seasonal mushroom pickers, hunters, and fishers. Days later, another woman's body was found under eerily similar circumstances, yet the Ivanovo force did not open a case. Collaboration between the Kostroma and Ivanovo police eventually led to a breakthrough. Rumors spread of a suspect's arrest. 42-year-old Osman Aminov from Privolzhsk. He owned a dark blue Dnepr, although he claimed it had been broken for months. Aminov's criminal record revealed a past rape conviction. The investigators believed his past crimes could have escalated to murder. Aminov was put under surveillance. Indirect evidence linking him to the Volgorechensk murders mounted. However, direct evidence, like personal items taken from the victims, was still missing. Such trophies are often kept by sexual predators, and Aminov's family, consisting of dozens of members, might have hidden them. Aminov was interrogated the same night his home was searched by the police, accompanied by the Special Forces, Oman. The search yielded no evidence, and Aminov insisted his conviction was a youthful mistake for which he had paid his dues. He claimed the current accusations were tragic coincidences. Investigators had one last hope. Biological traces left by the murderer on the Volgorechensk schoolgirls revealed the killer's blood type. However, more sophisticated and costly DNA analysis was needed to solidify the case. Genetic testing was a novel procedure available only in Moscow and required a waiting period of at least 2 months, costing around 2 million rubles, approximately 200,000 rubles today. Despite limited resources, the Kostroma detectives pursued this opportunity, convinced it could provide the conclusive evidence needed to bring the murderer to justice. Law enforcement officials were reaching out to local businesses, seeking funds for a costly procedure. Eventually, the money was provided by the local power plant. The investigation obtained a unique DNA profile of the murderer, The next step was to compare it with Osman Aminov's DNA. Biological samples were sent to Moscow. The conclusion, received 2 months later, was unequivocal. Osman Aminov had no involvement in the deaths of Anya and Yulia. When Aminov was informed that he was free, he wept. The officers apologized to him. After calming down, Osman also apologized for his lack of faith in the Soviet law enforcement system and for preparing himself for execution. Despite everything, they parted on good terms. Osman repeatedly assured them that he held no grudge against the investigators, understanding the gravity of the crimes they were trying to solve. He also mentioned that he now realized the police were determined to find the real killer, not just anyone to appease higher authorities. However, the real murderer remained at large, despite the extensive efforts by detectives in Kostroma. The investigation into the deaths of the Volgorechensk schoolgirls had to be paused. This didn't mean the police stopped searching for the maniac. 5 years passed. During this time, the families of Anya and Yulia had lost hope that justice would be served. But the detectives hadn't forgotten. They knew the criminal was still out there, and there could be more victims. In the basement of a newly constructed residential building in Volgorechensk, a body was found with multiple injuries and stab wounds. The identity of the deceased was quickly established: Vadim Kuznetsov, who lived in a neighboring yard. The nature of his wounds was unusual. A star and a date were carved into his body, the latter being the day of his death according to expert analysis. These inscriptions alarmed the detectives. At that time, there had been no reports of satanic or ritual murders in the Kostroma region. Could this be the first, or was the criminal trying to mislead the investigation? The detectives quickly identified a suspect. Vadim was last seen alive in the company of a young man who was also known in the area. His name was Vadim Kuzmichov, a 30-year-old unemployed father of 2. The detectives found this name familiar. Kuzmichov had come under scrutiny at the very beginning of the investigation into the Volgorechensk girls' deaths. He was listed among local motorcycle owners. One of the detectives had visited his home. Kuzmichov had claimed his motorcycle was broken, and his family confirmed this. The officer didn't verify the claim, perhaps because Kuzmichov was a former law enforcement officer himself. Indeed, Kuzmichov had once served in external security forces, but was dismissed for conduct unbecoming of an officer. Later, he was convicted of hooliganism. When he was detained on suspicion of Kuznetsov's murder, Kuzmichov initially refused to confess. Meanwhile, detectives decided to re-examine his possible connection to the deaths of the Volgorechensk schoolgirls. Upon reviewing Kuzmichov's medical records, detectives discovered that the 1991 case file contained inaccurate information. It seemed the officer had recorded the blood type based on Kuzmichov's word without verifying it. Why had the suspect lied? Did he know the murderer's blood type? Could he be the murderer? To verify this, the detectives decided to play the DNA card again. They explained to the suspect that genetics could identify a person from saliva or semen. After a few days, Kuzmichov decided to confess. He admitted to raping and killing his neighbors from Volgorechensk. He also described his travels through the roads of the Ivanovo region, where the bodies of young women were found in the forest near Privolzhsk. They were also his victims. Kuznetsov was another of his victims. Genetic testing confirmed the truth of Kuzmichov's confessions. Unfortunately, the investigation revealed another detail. The young man had been under the care of the regional psychiatric clinic and had undergone treatment multiple times. This might explain his honesty, knowing he wouldn't face the death penalty. Vadim Kuzmichov was tried by a Russian court a year after the country declared a moratorium on the death penalty. He never met the families of his victims. Psychiatrists deemed him insane, incapable of taking responsibility for his actions. For many years, the killer has been undergoing mandatory treatment at a psychiatric hospital in the Kostroma region. He is receiving care and might even be released one day. But that's a story for another time. Don't miss out on our future episodes. Subscribe to our channel, hit the like button, and leave your comments. Your feedback is really important to me.